project is called Noether. We're named
Noether.
after Emmy Noether, the German Jewish mathematician who created the mathematics around symmetry.
Andrew Brick and Brendan Laban, and tell me about your background. Tell me, how you got into crypto, and tell me the name of your cat, and just kind of start there. Let's get the backgrounds on who you guys are and why you're doing this crazy thing, and how it started.
Sure. So I can start. So I actually grew up here in St. Louis. My education is in energy technologies. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering, specifically with a focus on energy storage and solar. But around the time that I was getting my master's degree, I did a short stint in an Israeli cybersecurity firm. And that's really when I learned, the depth to which Bitcoin technology, as I knew it then, really went. I discovered Steemit, and I was like, wow, you could build voting and governance technologies with this sort of thing. I was like, I wonder if you could create, a giant complicated voting system. And that's when I discovered Ethereum. I've pretty much been working in the space ever since. I worked for a series of startups. Then I worked at an enterprise consulting firm where I met Brendan, and we began this project.
Sure.
Brendan?
Yeah, my name's Brendan Laban. My cat's name is Callie. She'll pop up probably on video a couple of times as she moves about. So I'm similar to Andrew. I grew up in the Midwest. Just grew up just south of St. Louis, kind of in the suburbs. I went to school for mechanical and aerospace engineering, and in about 2011, I was introduced to Bitcoin. And at the time, I was very much like, oh, this is just some scam tool that someone else out there is using to make money, and didn't really look into it a whole bunch. But I started trying to understand, like, what is this technology behind it? A couple of years after that, my roommate in college was building up his own startup. He was offering Bitcoin miners and hosting services, kind of just out of his basement, and with this other guy that he was working with. And that was becoming a very profitable company. People were wanting to buy all these Bitcoin miners, and they kind of had an exclusive access to some of these resellers. And they were buying them in bulk, getting a lot of good discount rates. So it was a very profitable business for them, to the point that they scaled up and moved out to Colorado. And in 2015, they asked me to come out with them and do some mechanical sort of aerospace aerodynamics work on their server stacks, because these Bitcoin miners, they were using so much electricity,
Nice.
they were using so much cooling and all this stuff, that if you could figure out like a 1%, 2% optimization on it, it would completely change the revenue they were making. So whenever I went out there thinking, oh, this is going to be like a standard database sort of, data center operation. And in fact, it was just a bunch of Bitcoin miners, Antminer S1s. I don't know if you remember, but they're basically
Sure.
like two boards with a heat sink and a fan attached to the middle of them. And we would plug those into the mains, and they were just all on these like wooden sort of pallets around the place. It was crazy setup that they had there. It was one of those like, oh, this is definitely a startup. They're like, yeah, like we just got all this new hardware in. So at the time, whenever I started there, they were the largest reseller of Bitcoin mining equipment in the entire North America.
Wow.
Yeah, they had contracts with Bitmain, contracts with a lot of other like Butterfly Labs, big names at the time. They were putting out a lot of hardware, and so my job in getting all of these to be efficient and getting to understand them, I had to get really deep in learning what Bitcoin, what Litecoin, what all these different things did. And so I got a crash course in what these how these networks operated at a very fundamental level, down to the like, this is why they're creating so much heat each time sort of reason. We were also working with a guy named Alex, who was a developer on Ethereum. He was one of the core developers there before it launched, and he was telling us about it. And we were familiar. We were like, "Oh, blockchain! We're moving around money. Like, this is really cool. Obviously, DeFi is the next wave of innovation." And then Alex tells us about Ethereum. He's like, "No, dude, it's like smart contracts built on a blockchain, which can completely change everything." And so I was like, yep, you're right. I can absolutely see how running a computer instead of just money is going to be completely game changing. And so I started looking at it, and I finished up my tenure there with them. They ended up exiting the company, sold it to a few people, broke it up, and I moved in and started working back here in St. Louis at Boeing for a couple of years. And I was watching, doing my traditional aerospace engineering, but still kind of watching the DLT industry. And I noticed that Ethereum while it was taking off, it wasn't taking off like I expected it to. I expected it to be very much one of those like, oh, everyone in the world suddenly understands like the value of this technology, and there's going to be DAOs, there's going to be like all sorts of crazy dApps going all over the place. We're going to see complete changes in the way that people are interfacing online. And after a few months, it was like, no, this wave isn't happening. This isn't going the way I expected it to. And so I decided, oh, well, if no one's going to take the reins, I'll go ahead and take the reins. And I started getting deep into programming, getting deep into how Ethereum worked, learning, the little bits of all these things. And that's how that was my introduction into Ethereum. So that's kind of why I'm an Ethereum hardliner, mainliner sort of deal. And so,
would you call yourself a maximalist? I guess not anymore.
Not anymore. I certainly believe that it's like one of the best things to happen to DLT in a long time, but it's not definitely not the end game, I would say, for us. Sure. And so, yeah, because what we see today is one of the primary causes that it's not gaining traction and things is that it's this congestion, right? Is that if the dApps that I was trying to run 5 years ago, they were simple dApps. They're like, send up a message, do this thing. It costs you a penny each time. You can't send a transaction for a penny these days. It just won't go through. You'll be stuck there forever. And this has, in my opinion, kind of dampened the adoption rate that Ethereum can possibly have. And so that's why, until they get these congestion rates solved, until they figure out how to keep DeFi from completely overwhelming their system, they're not going to be able to have the user adoption that's going to allow them to take over the world. And so whenever we were looking around, Andrew and I, we were working together a couple of years ago as blockchain engineers, as contractors. And we discovered this company called Radix. And they have this consensus algorithm. At the time, it was called Tempo. It was very cool. It used like logical clocks on the nose to kind of say everyone knows what time things are happening, and they all agree on like what times and how things like relate to each other. So it was very cool. It was like we liked it because it was reminiscent of like how the universe worked. Like everything is relative in the universe, right? So like, stars moving next to each other, they don't really care so much about each other until the whole light span and, their time reaches to each other. So like, it was a very cool consensus algorithm. And we started talking to them like, yeah, we can push 1 million transactions per second. We're like, haha, on theory, right? You can push 1 million transactions per second in theory. And they're like, no, we have a demo where we're pushing 1 million transactions per second through our network. I'm like,
amazing.
That doesn't sound really possible. So we got into it. We're like, oh, this is actually like the way that they're doing this is the right way. 100%. The consensus was really succinct. It didn't require a whole bunch of processing. We're like, okay, wow, but they can't do smart contracts, right? So like they're still like not as good as Ethereum because they'll never get beyond just being able to do basic DeFi. So we were like, okay, the reasons that they're able to move so quickly is because they're using the UTXO model. So it's very easy to shard a system and do all these things if you're using UTXOs. And so I thought, how do we apply this model? How do we get this scalability for Ethereum? So I can run my dApps at 1 million transactions per second. And in doing so, that's where we came up with the concept for Noether. And kind of that application of the Radix style consensus with a very particular algorithm for processing it allows us to operate full Ethereum transactions at their complete network throughput speeds. And it's where we have scalability, we have sharding, we have privacy in our transactions, we have upgradability, we have composability, we have a ton of things that because of this, the way that we've made these things interoperable, the Ethereum layer and the UTXO layer, we can do just tons and tons of things now. It's a generalized algorithm because we're wanting to run a generalized computer, right? Not just Ethereum. We want to run any computer on this. And so that's what we've accomplished today. We have currently a minimum viable product that's in pilot testing with 3 companies right now. We have several more that are in our pipeline to become pilot tests as well. And we have our first public iteration will be going on the Radix public network, which is set to launch later this year.
Okay. Wow. All right. That's great. We got the whole backstory about how you guys ended up in the concept. But first of all, I want to readdress how the two of you ended up becoming or starting to write code because that wasn't in your backgrounds unless you had already been doing it and you adapted, or did you just plunge in and learn, writing Solidity, or what happened there?
Well, for me personally, I mean, during an electrical engineering degree, you do write a decent amount of code.
Sure.
Typically at lower level systems, things like VHDL, things like building Simulink models, stuff like that. But certainly the programming fundamentals come with you. And actually, that's what I think makes Brendan and I work so well together is we have this very classical engineering education. And, a lot of times people from the computer science background have a very top-down view of what is possible within computer science. And ours is more of a first principles, how do you make the most efficient thing with the minimal pieces necessary, perfection is not achieved when there's nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So that's really what got us in. And I was in more of the security layer because I was at these lower level systems. And, Brendan with the mining hardware really had to interact with a lot of cyber physical systems, which brought him into learning a programming language like Solidity, which is really, really focused on minimalism and not leaving too much stuff on the chain. And I think that's probably why it suited Brendan so well.
Yeah, certainly Solidity was where I got my I wanted to build out the smart contracts that I saw that no one else was building, and then those need a front end, so you got to learn a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, a little bit of JavaScript, and then JavaScript runs everything, so you don't need to learn anything after JavaScript, and so that's basically where my fortes are. Is I'm a very good Solidity programmer, working in Solidity assembly a lot with those smart contracts. Because in the early days, back when Solidity was first launched, we didn't have nice things to do like string manipulation or that sort of stuff. You had to actually access the storage locations in the thing. So that was a kind of an inverse way of learning programming, where I had to learn literally like how the machine moves the bits around, and then I can figure out the stuff that it does on top of it.
Nice. Very nice. I love it. I love that you both kind of came at it from a, I guess, bottom-up approach to understanding how the tech works. That's really cool. That's great. All right, let's do this. Let's step back. Can you explain the project to me like you're talking to a 5-year-old that knows what Ethereum is in general concept, a programmable blockchain computer?
So, really, we have created a layer 1 scaling solution for Ethereum-based technologies. So our technology can interpret any code that effectively runs on Ethereum. We can also adopt basically any development tools built for Ethereum thus far. And all that technology really, creates the environment that allows you to quickly deploy things on our network without requiring all these extra seams and extra development times and all the additional work necessary for the Ethereum scaling solutions that exist today. Most of those are not, they're supplemental tools. They are things like side chains and state channels and relay networks. And while we don't have any like explicit objection to any of those technologies, we don't really feel that they maintain the trustless scalability that really the blockchain industry needs. So what our technology allows you to do is it allows you to basically run any application that would run on Ethereum, but about 1,000 times faster than what is possible today, at about 1/400th the cost, with finality times under 1 second. So with a better user experience as well. Current finality times on Ethereum are around 12 seconds. A lot of the competitors have, pretty good horizontal scalability, but their transactions take 40 seconds to confirm or something like that. Have you ever gone to the 7-Eleven and put your card in the thing and waited 30 seconds for it to confirm? That's a long time. You'd have a lot of people in the line if that were our financial system. So we built a system that can finalize transactions in under a second and can scale to 24,000 transactions per second cheaply while running code natively, without too many changes or hiccups along the way.
So it is a separate network,
Yes.
but it is EVM compatible, Ethereum virtual machine compatible.
Absolutely
correct?
A correct way to say it? Are you developing a bridge from Ethereum to the platform?
That will eventually be integrated in our system. However, the problem is Ethereum kind of runs really slow compared to our network. So the bridge kind of only flows one way effectively. We certainly can import, potentially tokens from Ethereum through atomic swaps and these sorts of things. But the reality is we couldn't back up our chain to Ethereum at the rate that it runs. Ethereum does not have the capacity to handle what our chain can.
I think the real question from an adoption perspective for you guys becomes, how do you get developers onto the platform? You've already taken care of the, hey, we're compatible. You don't have to rewrite everything. We're going to work. We have incredible benefits. We're faster. We scale. It's easier, the whole bit. But how do you get them to say, okay, yeah, I want to come onto this network because, or how do you convince them that, yes, the adoption will come so that the onboarding of users isn't difficult because they're not familiar with the platform, the network, and how it functions relative to what they're used to on Ethereum. I'm sure it's a better experience, but have you guys thought through that?
So there's really a couple answers to that question. The first and foremost being that we're bringing people into the blockchain space who are not yet involved in that space, companies that are adjacent to the blockchain space, or who definitely see the value in it but aren't yet engaged with it. And with that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to escape this bubble that is the crypto DeFi space, which is very enclosed, and we're trying to bring real value and real businesses. And not to say that the DeFi space doesn't bring real value, but we're trying to bring more of those traditional businesses and regular companies into the DeFi space, into the blockchain space, and using that real practical value add to bring on users and bring on a community. While at the same time, because we're deploying on Radix, which already has a growing community, we expect to inherit a decent amount of their users to use our platform as well.
Good. So how does it, I'm not deeply familiar with Radix. How is it working in conjunction with Radix? Are you leveraging what they had already built? Tell me kind of what the relationship is there.
Yeah, certainly. So we have a partnership with Radix. They are launching their core token, which is being basic UTXO functionality and stuff, and we're allowing people to run the Ethereum dApps and things on their network. And so we've had more or less of a symbiotic relationship from the get-go. So we've a formal business partnership with them. Whenever they launch their public network, we will be launching kind of a layered service on top of that. And so you'll be able to access our APIs and say, what does this kind of Ethereum VM look like on the Radix chain? That your transactions will actually go onto the Radix chain and be confirmed on the Radix chain, and we'll be using all of that thing, but then we'll be interpreting them in a specific way. And that's what gives us this Ethereum functionality, is the way that we interpret the transactions. The Radix chain handles all of the ownership, handles all of the sharding, handles all of the communications and things that we need at a core network layer to say that, yes, your transaction is permanent, finalized, will never ever leave this ledger. And then we provide the services on top of that to say, this is what it does in the context of Ethereum. And being able to have that dichotomy also allows us to kind of tune little switches. So we can say, oh, you have an encrypted message, so this is your private transaction. We can do private transactions. We can say, oh, you're running the Ethereum Classic virtual machine, so we're only going to process the Ethereum Classic type of transactions over here and get only this type of state. Whereas, someone that wants a traditional Ethereum thing, or someone that wants a Hyperledger Fabric flavored EVM can run it over there. And so this is having that ability to have composability across the entire ecosystem is another way that we're bringing in developers, because it's not just us, it's not just Ethereum, it's literally anyone out there that is running a blockchain thing eventually will be able to put your application on our network.
So when we say we're running a layer one, it's sort of a matter of interpretation. To some degrees we're a layer one, and to some degrees we're sort of adjacent to a layer two. You'll be able to read more on exactly how we're doing this in our upcoming white paper, which will be launched sometime this month. We're going to provide a little more detail on exactly how that works. But suffice it to say that we can deploy the full stack, which is a purely just faster Ethereum, as well as this layered stack that will be deployed on top of the Radix chain as a public network.
That's what I was kind of getting from that description, was that, yeah, you're kind of a layer two to Radix, but you're also your own network, right? So I could function exclusively on your network, but I can also take advantage of the Radix blockchain. And am I saying that correctly?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. That's really cool. And did that vision start off that way?
So in a way, yes. Our long-term goals are to have an entirely application-specific chain where, we see long term problems with the blockchain industry in general being being threatened by quantum. That's a big deal. Like a lot of chains aren't going to survive the quantum supremacy jump, and long term like storage costs, like all these sorts of things. And so we have plans to, once we've proven out that this technology is scalable, that it can do all these things, to have an application specific chain that allows us to focus on these needs, to be quantum secure, to have the not exploding, infinitely increasing storage costs, to be able to provide zero knowledge proofs to transition between states. It's layer one for us. With Radix has always been like yes, we're going to do this, absolutely, but then for our full vision, we are like, it would be nice if they were part of us in the future, but it's not a requirement.
I think it's also worth pointing out that one of the things that we see with a network as fast as ours is we don't even necessarily see our network as the end all be all. While we believe that we're going to scale with the industry and we can handle really global scalability, we think that it's really going to take all hands in the end. We think that even if we get to 1 million transactions per second, that's still not really fast enough for an entire global financial ecosystem that is hyper converged and constantly interacting with itself. That system requires something on the order of billions of transactions per second. So we see what we've done as an extremely important step in achieving that degree of scalability, and definitely the spearhead of achieving that kind of scalability. That's where we are today.
That's cool. So it sounds like a big vision, and kind of a take over the world vision. Do you, in the interim, we talked about the difficulty with Ethereum being able to keep up with what you're doing for you to be able to bridge other blockchains. I assume that's true of most other blockchains that exist today, that really you'd have to operate over here with Radix for now or by yourself, because you're not going to be able to integrate or cross chain with other chains that already exist. Is that correct?
We definitely can integrate across chains. That's definitely in our roadmap, and we do expect that to happen. Really, it's about the nature of the interaction being back and forth and the timeliness by which we can rely on other chains to complete in the time that we are completing our transactions. So while those are all entirely possible, it's just there's a latency on our end where we're just sort of waiting for transactions to confirm on other chains before we can progress with whatever the trade is.
So it becomes a bottleneck.
Yeah, I get it. Makes sense. Things. Yeah, well, those people are used to waiting, right? So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, coming onto our chain, it's very easy because it's resolution on your measurement. How quickly can you detect that a transaction's confirmed on the other chain is basically how quickly you can get it onto our chain. But then zero knowledge proofs are progressing pretty quickly. We expect to be able to leverage a lot of those in the future as well. Especially to address additional storage needs and being able to show, this is how, maybe we didn't capture some 100 blocks of Ethereum data, but here's a zero knowledge proof that covers every single bit of it. And so those sorts of things are coming along very quickly by other people. So we're focused on this, getting things in the door quickly and getting them confirmed and then being able to process them.
What you talked earlier about privacy. Can you tell me more about kind of how you see privacy in the net for your network and how you're approaching it?
Yeah. So because of the way that we just look at the data that's coming through the chain, and our algorithm allows it to be sorted and sharded and do these interesting things. But the way that we interpret it on top of that is dependent on whether or not we can actually read that message. And so if we detect that there's an encrypted message on the chain, we just skip it, which is the same thing Ethereum would do. This is basically the premise of most of our operations, is that if we can't interpret it or it's not adhering to spec, it doesn't belong in this virtual machine that we're processing. And so that machine will just skip it until eventually we find one that it works for. So if you have a virtual machine that's only reading messages that are decryptable by a specific key ring, you can do encrypted transactions being sent around the network in that fashion, because the miners themselves don't need to read the message. They just need to know what order to put it in relation to all of the other messages that are on chain.
So what this means is we can kind of get the best of both worlds when it comes to public and permission chains. This is an environment where those things could coexist.
Got it. No, that sounds pretty cool, actually, and powerful, right? So That seems to lead to, and I've just gotten this from the couple of things you guys have said. It sounds like some of your initial focus, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the people you're testing with and onboarding, is almost more of an enterprise strategy initially. And I don't know what the longer term plans are in terms of public or public facing. Is that kind of what you're approaching, and how you're approaching bringing people onto the network first, like specific use cases for a specific industry or project type?
Yeah, so the businesses that we're working with are all sort of blockchain adjacent.
Okay.
They're all businesses that understand the value of blockchain immediately, but don't necessarily know how to deploy their technology on it, or how to get a network that can handle the kind of throughput that they're expecting. So in that regard, they're sort of already part of the community. They're not strictly the enterprise that a lot of people might refer to as enterprise.
Okay.
But we really think that this is a two-pronged approach to sort of bootstrap this network into life, is both demonstrating to the community that this is a real practical tool, that it actually solves problems, that it's not just more smoke and mirrors, which is something that's pretty typical for our industry. While at the same time demonstrating to these businesses that this is a real value add, that this is a real network that can support a community, that their technologies that leverage our chain will potentially be able to leverage that community, and vice versa. So really, we think that it's very interesting, because sort of in the age of decentralization, the differences between a contractor, a business, and an individual are starting to become a lot blurrier.
Sure.
And really, we see our technology as creating an ecosystem, a platform where all these things can coexist and mutually benefit and create value for each other as well as themselves.
That's cool. What can you kind of, whatever you can disclose, can you give me some examples of the types of uses that some of these folks are investigating or developing for, that you're integrating?
Yeah. So one of our most proud partners is called Sonified, and what they do is they've developed a consensus algorithm that allows you to prove that your energy that you're creating with your solar panels actually came from a field of solar panels, and wasn't just a diesel generator hooked up to a solar panel and then like pushing that through. And so they're going to be able to produce green energy credits on chain using this consensus mechanism. And if you're running a field of 100,000 solar panels that are all trying to determine, okay, who's lying about what energy they're producing and all this stuff, and then trading carbon credits on top of that, you need a very performant chain. And so that's what they're doing on us. Well, we're working with them in, can't specifically say, but there's EU countries that they're working in that we're expecting to pilot in, as well as there some American, US based locations as well. And so that's one of them. Another one is we are looking at an IoT company that works with the Department of Defense.
Internet of Things.
Yeah, Internet of Things. And so everyone is kind of aware of blockchain and Internet of Things also knows that like these two seem to be very compatible technologies. Everyone says like, oh yeah, like blockchain and IoT, big data and like big money and like all these sorts of things. They obviously go together, but no one's figured out how yet.
Right.
And so we're working with them and this protocol that we like called Ocean Protocol, and they allow you to trade data sets around. And so what we're proposing, what we've done with our IoT module is we've allowed them to post changes to their data. So you don't actually put the data on chain, you put the updates, and you post proof of the updates to the chain, and then people can buy those on chain, and they can get access to that. So you never actually expose the data to people, but they can move it around and they can sell it to the people that are interested in it. And so allowing them to do that in the DoD space allows them to say, oh, well, our private contractors know where every single part that they've ever sold has gone, if it's on this plane or if it's on this plane or if it's on this plane, but they can't necessarily see the entire ecosystem because they don't have access to the entire ecosystem of data. Only like the people that have those data access tokens are allowed to see that. And so that would be, in this case, the military or whomever is involved in the bidding process for these. So it's a very powerful technology for them to be able to integrate with in that regard.
That's cool. When do you guys think you'll have a commercially deployed kind of application where you can point to and say, look, we're there. You know what I mean?
I think that in terms of on the public network, I think that that's later this year, shortly
Cool.
after we deploy our public network. Before then, things live in pilot stages or they're being tested on smaller scales. But certainly the testing is well underway, and we are seeing very interesting results across all sorts of different industries and applications. I think it's also worth mentioning we're working with a company that is a social networking company for underserved communities. So I think really where Noether belongs is all of these applications that have been begging for this scalability and haven't had it, and that's really where we see ourselves entering the market. Is a lot of these companies they've wanted blockchain, but they've avoided it because they know it's slow. Things like the energy industry, things like large scale supply chains, they all have like their solutions, but they're not really seeing the value from blockchain that they want to, because it's very expensive to run and it's very hard to scale. And even when they do scale, it usually requires additional development costs to adapt to layer 2 or some other type of problem. And that's really where we see ourselves changing the way that industry views blockchain and the way that the members of the blockchain community view the industries that are integrating with it.
Yeah, so kind of back to what can you point to today? Well, we have cloud infrastructure that's running where you can show you the transactions running through that network. It's all very much developer-oriented things. But for our public network, we do plan to have a UI available. We will have a test launch available. Radix will be launching a beta network, and we'll be launching on top of that. So people will be able to come in. They'll have a UI to log in, start generating, see their accounts, see, how. So one of the interesting things, which we haven't touched on yet, is that we don't require our users to interact with cryptocurrency. So we can allow them to directly purchase their transaction fees from us for dollars. So as a user, your experience is you go in, pay $5 with your credit card, you get $5 in transaction fees added to your account, and then you can expend those transaction fees as you send transactions. And our fee per transaction right now, we're estimating it to be about 2.5 cents per transaction, an almost flat rate, because you're really only impacting the ledger, which isn't actually all like the extra processing involved.
Right.
So you're not competing with DeFi to process on your data. You're just competing with whomever is out there, which is us, which is our API and our platform and our processing. So that's why we can offer these extremely, extremely low transaction fees and do it in a way that's, regulatorily compliant with US and EU regulations, eliminates the cryptocurrency aspect for regular users because they don't really care. They just want to see the dollars and make it very user friendly for them.
Very cool. Real quick, that whole sonified thing, I always wondered about how legit the actual claims were of energy running through from solar and other alternative sources. And I've never expressed it, but when you said it, I was like, oh, that's a perfect use case. That's absolutely brilliant. I love that. So, okay. So let's talk about, did you raise funding? Are you doing this on your own?
We're currently self-funded. We're raising a seed round. We're hoping to make it as large as a potential Series A.
And then in terms of how you're going to operate, is this going to be, are you operating as a corporation? Are you operating as a nonprofit, a foundation of some kind? How do you foresee kind of operating? Will you have your own business development team? Are you going to have your own marketing teams? Are you going to have people that are actually out pitching adjacent industries to join the platform? Kind of what's your plan from that perspective?
So we see in Ethereum, you have Infura, where people pay for API access to the chain data. You have various other things for storage, for hosting miners, and then for deploying private environments. There's all these different things. And we're going to wrap all those up into a single business operation, which then leverages our public infrastructure, our open source code that we're going to be deploying that allows people to run these Ethereum virtual machines on top of Radix on their public network. We give you API access for less than it would cost you to run it on your own. And then also, like I said, that our ability to charge transaction fees in the Ethereum layer and abstract away the network fees for them. So we expect that our decentralized public network, everyone's going to be out there. Everyone can just use it. Everyone can pay the network fees if they want. But our business, where we're going to be making money is on the services on top of that, being able to access it just with an API, being able to get these building blocks for your dApps in place where it's, do you have access to legal services? Do you have access to these stable tokens? Do you have access to AML, KYC services? Are you tracking your transactions? Do you have notifications? All those sorts of things. That's what we're going to be providing to users and developers, and that's where we're going to be making the most of our money.
So it's kind of the classic open source model, or the more recent open source model of build this infrastructure and platform, and then you bolt the other services on top of it, hosting or whatever it might be, and that you KYC, whatever, that you then provide, and that's the revenue stream that comes in. Would that revenue stream be coming into a business owned by you guys? Would it be coming into the project? Would it be a mix of things? Would it be a totally decentralized business running like a DAO where people have invested in? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so in the short term, definitely it's our corporation. We're owners in the corporation, and we're going to operate this like a traditional business where we expect to have marketing, we expect to have sales, active sales, we expect to be directly reaching out, major advertising campaigns, that sort of stuff, and those will be in an effort to drive regular users to the public network, as well as to get enterprise users to set up private deployments that we're hosting for them. And eventually we do expect that there will be kind of a split whereby one arm of the company devotes entirely to decentralized tech and becomes a nonprofit, whereas the remaining portion of the company that's doing all these API services remains a corporation, and allows for traditional investment in that regard.
Cool. Andrew, did you have anything else on that?
No, I think that was an apt description.
Awesome. All right. So did you guys know each other for a long time before you started this project?
We did not know each other for a long time, although we definitely knew that we were destined to know each other. We definitely were very similar people when we met, and we definitely, see a lot of each other in each other. And that's part of the reason why we developed this project, and part of the reason why we knew that, you're one of the people who gets what this technology really is. You get
that's
it.
Cool.
And that's actually a really rare find in this industry. Together we spent something like 13 years in this very nascent industry, seeing it be born and then arise to now the incredible level of adoption we've seen. The St. Louis Federal Reserve put out a paper on DeFi yesterday. I thought that was
awesome.
I thought that was it was so cool, especially since we're in St. Louis too. So we got dual recognition there. But yeah, that's the kind of adoption that we knew was going to happen in our heads, but it's still pretty astounding to see before our eyes, and the $15 billion locked in DeFi value or whatever. So it's been a long time coming, and we've seen so many bad protocols and broken code and just so much of the stuff that was not the nice developer experience that people are having today. We attended a seminar on the latest development tools for Ethereum not too long ago, and we were just blown away. We were just like, wow, this sure would have been great to have 5 years ago. But yeah, I think we just kind of found each other because we are some of the few people who we feel actually understand this industry. And I've talked to so many people who work deep in this industry who still don't fully understand what this technology is about. And I'm excited to for people to start realize that en masse, for people to really get it, both people within the space deeper understanding, and then people outside of the space getting their first understanding. It's really exciting to watch.
That's cool. When was the big holy crap, we're going to pull this off moment? Have you had that moment where it was you deployed and here it is, and oh man, we actually got this far? I can't believe it.
Well, we've had a couple of moments where it's definitely been thank goodness we're not crazy. Certainly seeing our transaction rate come in the first time was definitely a highlight for me. It wasn't a lot. It's just a simple script. We have it on our webpage actually. It's just a little script that shows a bunch of clients connecting to our node and sending about 6,000 transactions per script. We had 4 scripts running, and hit 24,000 transactions per second
Nice.
which is about as much as you can get with the current hashing availability, signing private keys and stuff. Doing it as quickly as you possibly can. That's about the max. Sharding and stuff is obviously going to push us up to that full million, and beyond. But so that was seeing that proof of concept work was one. Seeing our first token transfer go through, where we were showing like, oh yeah, we can actually like interpret these as full Ethereum transactions. So I sent a raw Ethereum transaction through our JSON RPC API, the standard ones, and got back exactly what I expected. My token transfer went through, and I was like, this is amazing, right
Nice.
here. And then when we launched our first pilot, was I think the next big one. We're like, okay, finally, like someone else is
Using
saying like this is a good thing. Yeah. And I think the biggest one is going to be when we launch on the public network and we get those first users. That's going to be where it's like, yep, if we just let it go from here on, it should self-sustain. And then our ideas are out there at least. And even if the business goes under, they've got our ideas, and the industry can develop on those and grow from those and take this massive step forward.
That's cool. And what's your kind of time frame on public? I know that's difficult to probably commit to, but you know, generally,
we expect to have our test network available before the end of Q2 this year, cool. And the public network is before the end of this year, probably closer to the middle of this year, and I can't be any more specific than that.
Nah, I wouldn't either.
Heavily dependent on Radix. Yeah.
And then, where are you kind of? Have you started building a community yet? Have you started getting people engaged with you from a community perspective that are excited about what you're doing?
So I think to a lot of people, we're kind of a subset of the Radix community right now.
Okay.
Very, very new on the scene. You know, this is our first interview from like third party.
Cool.
But we definitely know that the community is even bigger than we are aware of. We know we have occasionally found people talking about us when in places that we did not think that they would be talking about us. Yeah, so the community building is just now getting going, and I think it'll really probably kick off a lot more when people can get their hands dirty with the test network and the public network. But right now we do have our community, and I do think it's growing. As we get the word out.
Cool. And how do you explain what you do to the people in your lives that have no clue what the heck you're doing?
That's a great question. We have a bunch of people in our lives. I told a bunch of friends to buy Ether when it was worth $8, who are now all just kind of yelling at me and saying, "Why didn't you make me buy more?" and things like this. But it's really interesting to see that they've been getting more and more into blockchain. Like both Brendan and I, we're just kind of just like beacons for information about blockchain, and anyone who gets within 30 feet of us is going to hear some blockchain stuff. So I think as of late, it's the change that I've really seen, at least among my social circle, is not so much that they are, they're suddenly realizing that this is something that they need to engage with, that it's something that they have to actually do some lift and actually work to understand this very complicated thing, because it's clearly not going away. So it's kind of flipped on its head. I'm used to explaining what it is that we do and why we do this. And now the tides have kind of turned, and people are starting to ask more specific questions. I just had a friend the other day who I haven't talked to in more than a year who asked me, what do you know about this Ethereum liquidity pooling? And I was like, oh, wow, you're already that deep in. Okay. But yeah, it's really the questions have started to become more detailed, less so that like we've done more explaining.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. For my family's not very technical. I have a few people in my family that are very technical, and most of the rest of them are very much like, how does Facebook? And so explaining blockchain to them, we don't really explain like, oh, well, you hash and you can prove that the data is always going to be there, but you can very easily show the problems that blockchain can solve, where you can say, oh, look, wouldn't it be great if you could just trust that this person was saying the right thing, or you could just show that this person like was doing this thing in the past, or you could prove, that so-and-so scored so many touchdown points because an oracle said so. All these sorts of things they become very obvious that when people think about them, and then they start to apply them as they encounter these situations in their normal life. They're like, oh, wait, like this is similar to that other situation that could be solved by blockchain. So I guess blockchain could fix this one too, right?
Nice.
Like, Yep, and then they
That's
start getting
awesome.
it more and more and more, and then they would want to start talking. Ideally, this is like the normal public, which is my approach to the normal public as well, same as my family. Those people would then come to the developer friends that they've got and say, "Hey, I heard about blockchain. Can you build me an app that like solves this specific problem that I've got?" And then the developer would be like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. I can definitely do that on blockchain." And then it advances the whole industry. So the normal people,
That's
I don't think will
awesome.
ever understand what blockchain does. I think they'll
Right.
understand it to the same level that they understand how TCP works.
Right. It just
It's
does.
a thing that their computers do, and the
Yep.
developers care about the details about it.
I think
Absolutely.
one of the ways that we oftentimes find ourselves explaining to blockchain when we're really trying to bear down into it is something Brandon and I say all the time is we want to get to the point where you can trade the energy that you generated on your solar panel on your roof for a sandwich at like the gift shop downstairs.
Nice.
That's like, or like where you're trading like, derivatives, your derivative and options for like the sushi that you bought, at the restaurant. That's the kind of like close, hyper converged, like super transparent, super data aware kind of economy that we think we're headed towards.
That's awesome. I feel that too. I don't do a lot of blockchain explanation because people know that I'm on the trading side a lot, but I'm more fascinated with what's possible underneath. But every year I go to my two kids went to the same elementary school, and so for career day, my wife's like, "Well, what are you going to tell them on career day?" And so what I do is I actually walk them through how the real financial system works. And we do role playing, and they're each a banker or they're a store owner or whatever, and little smarty candies or the money. Anyway, at the end of it, when I tell them that the Federal Reserve has to print some more money, the look of shock on their face is classic. And for me, what I realized the first time I did it and it worked, and parents are calling me saying, "Why the hell is my kid coming home and telling me to buy Bitcoin? What did you do today?" And they come home with like urgency, like this is an emergency. Dad, we have to do this. The entire financial system is going to collapse. And what I realized was how few people understand how money works, right? So that whole TCP/IP example or whatever, most of the population has zero clue what happens with our financial system, right? So when you open their eyes to it, they're like, "Well, how stupid are you adults?" Right? I mean, who created this system? This Bitcoin thing makes so much more sense, So I love the example of saying, give me real world examples that I can prove on the blockchain that would solve a problem for you. I think that's a really brilliant way to pitch it. I love that. That's great. That's great. So go ahead.
These days, all we have to say is, remember Robinhood?
Oh, yeah, there you
Remember
go. Perfect.
GameStop? Yeah.
Perfect. So tell me about, we'll wrap it up here pretty quick, but how much are you guys raising in the first round, do you think?
We're going for between $1 million and $2.5 million. $1 million allows us to get about 18 months of runway. It gets us to the point where we can show for sure this is going to work. But then $2.5 million gets us to where we never have to raise money ever again, which would be a nice place to be in.
Yeah, have you guys thought about targeting the potential clients on the pilot side of these industries that you're going after?
As far as for investment purposes, as like venture, we have actually. We so reaching out to places is kind of an effort in calling people more so than getting good warm introductions like we'd like. But certainly, like we've looked at venture space in the insurtech industry, in the financial industry, and the surprisingly the mechanical engineering industry as well. We've reached out to a few people in there.
That's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, manufacturing and IoT. Yeah.
I would say that you could probably find some crossover there of firms that have invested in those, are niche to those industries, but may have some blockchain or crypto investments as well. So, if you check out Crunchbase and you kind of search for folks who are investing in aerospace or engineering or manufacturing, but also they have another investment in a startup in the crypto or blockchain space, you might be able to find some targets there. And the other thing is potential customers, right? The customers will see the power of this, and once they kind of are up and running, some of these larger enterprises have venture arms. So within the corporation itself, and it's obviously in their best interest if they see value in the network you're building for their industry, it's in their best interest to have a piece of that, what they can see being the future of their industry, right? So if you can make that pitch from a project perspective, then the pitch from a venture arm perspective becomes a lot easier. So just something to think about.
We're definitely exploring that.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. So anything else we should know about the project? Anything you're most excited about? Do you kind of envision like, Ethereum plus kind of the kinds of projects you're doing for your network eventually? Or do you really see yourselves focused kind of on these enterprise business level, replacing existing infrastructure kind of world, and you're going to focus there first? Where are your thoughts? Where would you like it to be?
Well, certainly we're going to be. One of our favorite statistics is that 90-something% of enterprise deployments of blockchain will need replacement in the next 2 years. So we hope to be that replacement technology for those enterprises, which will then help drive development down. They're not focused on scalability. They're not focused on like, oh, how do we batch transactions together? They're focused on delivering features at that point. And that's, we want to be the backbone for that feature development push. And being partners with those enterprises. And eventually, we do expect that the public network will become pretty powerful and will have kind of the same effect that Ethereum does on the public today. But complete integration of all of these is the end game.
Very cool. I definitely see that there's a strong appeal from a public network perspective. I think that's a much longer road to haul than the strategy you guys are taking. I think it's actually smart because those networks, those industries will start bringing users to you, right? And people who will say, oh, we could build that, we could build this. And so I think that kind of network effect is really smart on your behalf, rather than trying to just be Ethereum replacement or Ethereum killer, which always cracks me up when people say that, right? I mean, if you look at CZ and Binance Smart Chain, I mean, here's a business with millions and millions of existing users using their primary token. They have a great network. And their transactions, I think last week, were up to 75% of Ethereum's transactions. But it's still a hard road for him and them to unseat the king, even when gas prices are ludicrous. So I think there's a really smart strategy, you guys, and an approach you're taking. It's like, you can be that eventually, but you get to start here, which makes a lot of sense.
So we can be reached at dlt.io, and our Twitter handle is @NoetherDLT.
Spell Noether for everybody.
NOETHER DLT.io. And and I think, one of the things, just one last note on this, our relationship with Ethereum, our vision, we don't really see there being one singular dominant blockchain network in a long enough time. There's just too much vested interest in too many of these different chains. What we do see happening is this interoperability, these like bridges, these atomic swaps seem to be emerging. So the direction we think everything is headed in is really a quilt of blockchains, wherein we think ours would just be the fastest environment for code execution. Not just like the Autobahn of blockchains. That's really where we see ourselves, and that's the direction we're headed in. Thank you so much for taking the time to interview us.
That's cool, man. Thanks so much for taking the time to tell me all about it. This is really cool.